Have many, many questions from our viewers today.
All right.
The first question is about the idea of things like global conspiracies, shadow government, financial master plans, etc. The idea that government or financial powers that are secretly guiding everything in this long-term controlled way. Is there stuff like that actually going on that needs to be revealed and processed and sorted out? Or is it more of a conspiracy rabbit hole that some people go down, but not something that necessarily applies to collective consensus reality?
To some degree, some of the idea of these conspiracies does exist because people on your planet that are negatively oriented will attempt to dominate certain aspects of your society. But they are not necessarily to the degree that many people think. Many people, because of their fear-based beliefs, will blow this completely out of proportion, even though some of them are based in some degree of fact. But again, not to the degree that they may think. The idea, of course, in general, is that the greatest aspect of any such thing you might call a conspiracy is to get the people to believe that those that are behind the conspiracy actually have more power than they do. That is the first so-called principle of creating domination, is to make people believe that you're more powerful than you are, that you are more far-ranging than you have the capability of being. So if you diminish a lot of the conspiracies anywhere from 1/2 to about 1/3 of what you believe them to be, you will have a little bit more of an accurate assessment of the actual scope of any such endeavor. Although not all conspiracies exist, even though you may be made to believe that they do, but some do.
And what is the consequence of choosing to go down a rabbit hole where you focus so intensely on conspiracy theories and become so distrustful of any authority or governmental, body?
Well, we would think that would be clear. What you focus on, especially in the fear-based realities, will be what your reality becomes.
So in terms of the splitting prism and the different trains leaving the station, if you're strongly focused on conspiracy theories, what kind of a reality is that going to take you to? Is it going to put you on a train that is in a direction that you probably don't really prefer?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any suggestions for how individuals who have become enmeshed in conspiracy theories can liberate themselves from their fearful perspective?
They might be able to be told that they are being manipulated, they are being used, they are being, as you say, conned in many cases, but whether or not they choose to listen to those ideas is completely up to them. It may be possible that people that are too deeply involved in the idea of fear-based theories may not necessarily anymore have the ability to come out of them, but some of them might. It just depends on how they are approached. If they are approached with compassion and love, because they do perhaps in their mind have legitimate fears, but very often the legitimate fears that are being played upon by those that are attempting to manipulate them are not even really what they say the fears are. Usually the fears are much deeper and more basic than the things themselves that they believe to be true, that are false.
So it actually is about negative and positive beliefs. And sort of the idea that if you have a negative belief that's in your consciousness and you focus on it and you think that you can play with it without getting drawn too deeply into a negative vibration, is that correct, that at some point you will find that it's more and more difficult to escape the negative consequences of a negative belief that you're engaging with?
In general, yes. Any strongly held, continuously held belief system will create a kind of momentum or inertia that will make it more challenging eventually to change. That's the nature, again, of the belief. but primarily the negative ones, because the positive beliefs always contain an issue of freedom, an issue of ability to change, whereas the negative ones don't.
After we die, do we still have some of the same interests and desire to follow through with unresolved issues that we were working on in our life?
Yes, you can. But you can still make a decision as to how to go about that, when to go about that. So, yes, if you feel that there are things that were unresolved or not played out fully, you may choose a scenario in some way, shape, or form, whether physical or non-physical, in which to complete that scenario somehow, or at least create some experience that balances the idea of the energy out.
And if all that is positive, half positive and half negative, and everything is made out of love, does that mean that negative is made of love as well?
Yes, of course, everything is. But remember, first of all, it is more like the idea of 51% positive and 49% negative, because the center point, the balance point, gives you still the chance to choose, the freedom to choose, and therefore you could say that existence is slightly bent in the positive direction. The idea, again, is for people to understand that everything is made of the vibration of existence, which you translate as unconditional love. Negative as a mechanism is not necessarily negative as an experience in the value judgment way of phrasing that, because you are using negative mechanisms to focus your consciousness to have a physical experience, which you have to do in order to experience the concept of physical reality, because you are a bigger being than that. So you do have to impose negative mechanical frameworks on your consciousness in order to limit your ability to perceive yourself as a greater being, at least temporarily. So by applying those negative frameworks, that's not necessarily for a negative reason, so to speak. So the idea primarily is to understand how to use these mechanisms, the positive, the negative, but in a way that always has a positive result, a positive effect, if that's what you prefer.
So in a sense, are those who have gone farther into the darkness eventually able to go farther into the light? And is there some benefit to having experienced a lot of suffering?
Well, there can be. Again, it depends on how you use things. Remember, it's not about what happens, it's about what you do with what happens. So those that have allowed themselves the opportunity to finally let go, no matter how far into darkness they've gone, can snap and spring very rapidly onto the side of light. But again, it depends on the theme that they're exploring. Of course, ultimately, when you go into spirit, you will realize these things, and therefore you will have more freedom to recognize why you chose what you chose and how to utilize it to propel yourself in the direction that you prefer. So the things that we're talking about here, not that positive and negative don't exist on every level, but they're experienced very differently as physical reality. And therefore, when you stop being physical, you do have a little bit more insight and a little bit more freedom, a broader range of point of view with which to examine and assess what you did in the physical reality. And therefore, you have more freedom to use it in the way that you prefer to.
And you've taught us that in order to clear a negative belief, we have to ask, what would I have to believe is true in order to feel this way?
Generally, yes. Or the alternative question, if I did in fact move forward in the way I say I prefer to, what am I afraid will happen? For most people on your planet, that will usually reveal the negative belief.
Okay. So, and actually the wording for what would I have to believe is true about myself in relation to this situation.
Yes, that's the more precise, that's the more precise way to phrase it. Because it's always in relation to what's going on.
So when you ask that question, does it put you in a specific state of mind that allows you to have an answer?
Yes, if you're willing to listen. That's why we sometimes suggest the alternative form of the question, because so many of you are so used to the idea of fear that you can use it to your advantage by simply admitting that you're afraid of something if you move forward. It will usually be a quicker and clearer way to recognize what the fear-based belief is, because you're asking for it specifically. What am I afraid of? And if you're honest and willing to listen, the answer will come.
So if the question it brings the answer of I don't feel worthy.
Yes.
What is the antidote to that?
Well, again, it's understanding the nature of existence as we have described many times before. If you really, truly were not worthy, you wouldn't exist, because there are no mistakes per se within creation. So by saying I'm not worthy, in a sense, paradoxically, that's actually quite arrogant, because you're saying I, out of all of the beings in existence, am the only one that is not worthy of my existence. Believe me, if you weren't worthy of existence, you would not exist. So what you're doing by saying I'm not worthy is you are arguing with existence itself about the idea that you exist. And you will never win that argument, because you can never cease to exist. So if you can understand the way we're describing this structurally, you can snap yourself out of that illusion that you're not worthy. And again, remember the paradox. You have to be worthy of your existence in order to create an experience of unworthiness.
So like one person here is saying that, they feel negative emotions and negative beliefs are something bad and that there's something wrong with them, but they can't help they can't resist their negative beliefs.
Yes, they can. Yes, they can. The idea that you can't resist your negative belief is a negative belief in and of itself. That's what you have to pay attention to, is that that's not a fact. When you say, I can't resist my negative belief, that's not a fact. That's the negative belief attempting to convince you that it's very difficult and very challenging to let it go, because that's one of the ways that negative and fear-based beliefs have of perpetuating themselves, because that's what all beliefs are designed to do. Because if you didn't buy into a belief as true, whether positive or negative, you couldn't have a physical reality experience. It's the depth of your belief in the belief that creates the physical reality experience. Therefore, beliefs reinforce themselves with emotions, with thoughts, with behaviors and reflections of experience to make themselves seem like facts. But when you really listen and say, I just can't change this, I just can't resist my negative belief, you're not stating a fact, you're parroting the negative belief, who is designed to make sure you don't let it go. So no matter what comes out of your mouth, no matter what goes through your mind, those thoughts are not facts, and you have to pay attention to that idea and see through the smoke and mirrors. No matter how real, no matter how challenging, no matter how difficult it may seem, you are simply buying into a belief, and beliefs can be changed.
And if you feel like, oh, I want to eliminate this, I'm stuck, like the idea of rejecting the negative belief. What is the appropriate way to reject a negative belief without, in a sense, getting caught up in it?
You don't reject it. You accept that it's there. You own it. And you say, I must be doing this for a reason. What could the reason be? Let's see. It could be as simple as recognizing that I don't prefer this. And therefore, what do I prefer? And you can recognize it's just as easy to choose what you do prefer as it was to choose what you don't prefer, because again, they're all just belief systems. And therefore, you have to allow yourself to not pay attention to the idea that changing your belief is more difficult than anything else. That's just another belief system.
They're as easy to change as tissue paper, right?
Yes, because that's all they're made of.
And so as our consciousness and technology continues to evolve, will it get to the point where we can casually receive higher level insights and answers reflected from our higher selves just as easily as we might Google something and get the answer on the internet?
Yes, because as we say, this is one of the reasons why we suggest that you follow the formula that we've shared with all of you. Because when you act on your passion, what happens? You raise your vibration. When you raise your vibration, what happens? you become a better receiver and a better antenna for higher frequency information, and therefore you will get what you need. Remember, you cannot experience what you're not the vibration of. This is just physics. And conversely, you cannot experience the idea of anything different than the vibration you actually are. So if you raise your vibration, you can only really truly experience the things that are germane for that level of frequency. And if suddenly you start experiencing something that is below that level, it doesn't mean that you're still on that level. It means you've changed your frequency and lowered it so that you're now receiving something that perhaps you don't prefer. You have to realize it's simply not physically possible to receive information that is not the equivalent of the frequency that you're on.
And can you speak about the potential to course correct in our physical reality experience? Because you've often talked about missing an appointment. And if you miss an appointment, is everything thrown off, or does it course correct?
Not necessarily. You have many, many opportunities to course correct, and that's what life guides you through. In other words, when you get a reflection of something you don't prefer, that's an opportunity for course correction, because you can examine it, you can see it, you can find the belief that generated it, and you can change it. And that's course correction. Another format of course correction are the two positive modes of synchronicity that happen automatically when you're acting on your passion. Everything is synchronicity. There is true negative synchronicity, which spirals you downward and is the product of your fear-based beliefs. But there is also what we now are calling a traffic light version of synchronicity, where there is a synchronicity that is the green light that says, here's an opportunity that you are able to move forward on, so please act on it. And there is the red light synchronicity that says, right now, this is not the step for you. We will not allow you to be able to go further with this, and that should be your guiding mechanism to understand that that's not correct right now. As long as you're not the one dampening the excitement, if it's naturally waning, that's the red light synchronicity saying, stop, this isn't your path. Go follow what you can act on. Maybe you'll come back to this, maybe you won't, but it doesn't matter, because as long as you follow the green light version of synchronicity and act on the things that you are capable of acting on that are representative of your passion, it will be the same as traveling through your city in a safe way, because you will move through the green lights and you will stop at the red ones, and you will know then that everything is coordinated and everyone is safe.